Good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to the Wheel Summit 2021, the afternoon session today. So as we're in a webinar, the good news is you've already been muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about having to talk to turn them off. Apologies for the stumbling in advance here. Most importantly, we've got a really packed program, so we'd ask that you put all your questions and answers into the box at the bottom of your screen here, the chat box beside it. If you can leave that for any technical difficulties that you experience, drop me a note there and I'll be very, very happy to pass to work on it from there. So without further ado, I'd like to pass you on to Shona Murray, who is going to be our moderating today. Shona is European correspondent with Euronews. Thank you very much. Shona?
Thanks, Laura, and welcome to everyone. This part of today's summit entitled A Conversation with Ireland's EU Funding Contact Points. So anybody listening there, our CEOs, our development professionals, our charity organisations, community workers, anyone who feels they're eligible for EU funding, this is exactly the place to be, because we have a great list of people who are going to tell you how to get that funding, how maybe you had to change your proposals, alter them slightly to access funding. As we know, 2021 is the start of a new EU budgetary cycle. On top of that, Ireland is set to receive about just under €1 billion in recovery funding. So there's money to be received from all of you, and I hope that today's session is going to be helpful in terms of accessing that money. So let me just introduce our panel that we'll, for today. We have Lorraine Gilligan, who's the Executive Director of Lorgas, the National Agency for EU Programmes in Education, Training and Youth. We also have Brendan Mooney. He works as an EU Programmes Executive for the Northern and Western Regional Assembly. He spent 15 years as a chartered accountant in private practice before, so he knows a lot about the accounts, but also interreg funding and so on. So that's going to be really interesting. We have Gareth Murphy, who's the National Director for Horizon Europe at Enterprise Ireland, and also Luke Devoy, who works in the European Social Fund. He managing authority in the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. So a really great panel. And as we said there, we do have plenty of time for questions and answers. Put your questions into the Q&A format and we'll give you plenty of time, because I know that there's going to be really pointed questions coming from you. And also just remember the name of the people who are going to be speaking today, because you can contact them further, or they can definitely give you names of other people who may be able to help progress your proposals. So anyway, without further ado, let's introduce Lorraine Gilligan, Executive Director of Lorgas, who are a member of the National Agency for EU Programmes in Education, Training and Youth. Lorraine.
Hi, Shona. Hi, everybody. And thanks very much for having me here today. I'm delighted to be here to talk about Lorgas and the programmes that we have on offer for the civil society sector, the community and voluntary sector. You'll have to forgive me if you're already familiar with Lorgas, because I'm going to try and speak a little bit today as if you've never heard anything about Lorgas or never heard anything about Erasmus Plus or European Solidarity Corps. So just to introduce the programmes initially that we're involved with, Lorgas is responsible for managing a range of European programmes. Erasmus is probably the one that's most well known. European Solidarity Corps is another that's very relevant to the civil society sector. And we also have another range of non-funding but very much supportive and educational and network-based programmes like EPALE for adult education, eTwinning for schools, Eurodesk for youth work and information, and languages programs as well. So each program and each project takes a different approach and has a very different kind of a target audience. So if in the past you felt that Erasmus is only for educational institutions, or they're only education-based projects, what I would like to say today for you to think about is that actually these programs are about learning, and learning takes place across all different spectrums of life. So while the program does have different sectors and different fields that it works with, there is really a strong place for civil society organisations to engage in those opportunities. Erasmus Plus in the next cycle and European Solidarity Corps offer funding, and they will be offering almost double the funding that was available in the previous cycle of programmes, which is really interesting. And we really are very keen as an organisation. We're a very supportive organisation. So we try to be more than a funding organisation. We try to offer as much guidance and support and coaching and insights into your project ideas as you possibly can need, that you should be able to get from us.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. Double funding, that's great, a very optimistic start to all of this, and that's brilliant news. Brendan Mooney, EU Programmes Executive for the Northern Ireland and Western Regional Assembly.
Yeah, thanks, Shauna. I'm from the Northern and Western Region Assembly. I am the national contact point for 3 European ETC programs or Interreg programs, Interreg Europe, Northern Periphery and Arctic and Atlantic Area. And I suppose just with today's audience and in relation to some of the questions we'll be talking about in the next while, I'll be focusing primarily on 2 of those programs, the Northern Periphery and Arctic program and the Atlantic Area program. As I'm sure everybody knows that European funding works in 7-year tranches, and we're currently designing and developing the next round of funding. So today is an extremely timely event because where the programs aren't launched yet, they are being designed and developed, and I can give you a little bit of insight throughout this afternoon on the next round of funding and the focuses that these programs are going to look at. But that should spur people on to start thinking about their projects, start project development, partnership creation. And again, as national contact point, and you're speaking to a number of national contact points are speaking today, we're here to assist you, either help you put your application together, help you come up with your project idea, and help you create your partnership. If you're new to this, we can put you in contact with somebody that has the experience in Ireland. If you are an experienced project partner and you're looking for European partners, we can help you access that market too. So thank you very much, Shauna, and look forward to today.
Brendan, thank you very much for that. And again, really optimistic because the start of a new round of funding. And apology for saying Northern Ireland, it was Northern and Western Regional Assembly, totally Freudian slip, because I'm here in Brussels and we've been literally talking about Northern Ireland non-stop for 4 years. So Freudian there. Gareth Murphy, National Director for Horizon Europe and Enterprise Ireland.
Hey, so as you said there, I'm Gareth Murray from Enterprise Ireland. I lead the National Contact Point Network for Horizon Europe, the successor programme to Horizon 2020. It's a €95.5 billion programme. Couple of things I wanted to spell. First of all, I'm from Enterprise Ireland, but our mandate goes way beyond companies. And one of the core aspects of Horizon Europe from a European perspective is engagement with civil society and to widen the network of people that engage with the research and innovation programs. So it's not just about companies, it's about everybody. And there are 5 missions there. There's diverse from cancer to soil health. And then we have clusters involving everything from promoting and protecting cultural heritage to mental health, to climate change, to smart cities, to effective energy. So really, there's so many themes in there. And one of the key aspects of the program, as I said, is that civil society engagement, is that citizen engagement. And that's really what I'm here to talk about today as we go through and answer the questions.
That's brilliant. Again, optimistic there, Gareth Murray, knowing that there are so many themes that are broad and wide that people can get involved with. And now, last but not least, Luke Devoy, working in the European Social Fund Managing Authority in the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science.
Thanks, Jonah. So yeah, as you said, I'm working in the ESF Managing Authority. So if you're not familiar, ESF is really the EU's instrument for investing in people. In terms of the overall priorities we have, it really boils down to 3 main areas, which are employment, education and social inclusion. So under that, we would fund a range of different training courses, labour market programs, a range of different community activities. And I suppose how ESF works, I suppose it's important to bear in mind it's a shared management program. So that means that member states are given an allocation of funding by the EU, and then we'd agree a program with the Commission, which is implemented nationally. So our allocation for the next round is 451 million in terms of EU funding. So we as the ESF Managing Authority would then be responsible for developing that program for the next period for 21 to 27. And then managing its implementation, which is done in cooperation with a range of different government departments and agencies, but also very much with civil society playing a key role in terms of how it's actually delivered on the ground. So yeah, I'll be happy to talk about that and the main priorities that we have for the next period of funding.
That's great. Thanks a million for that, Luke. And we'll just dig a bit deeper then. Lorraine, back to you. Obviously, you said double funding, which is just music to everyone's ears right now. Can you just talk us through a little bit of, what areas people are accessible for people who want to access that money now that there's plenty of it?
Yeah, almost double funding.
Okay, well, we'll take it.
We'll take it though. Yeah, sure. I mean, what I would say is that I think, you'll hear a lot today about programs that are very large, very big, very broad in scope. So I'm going to try and speak a little bit in the general terms, but there are specific avenues and specific entry points for different types of organizations or institutions or even individuals in some cases. So I preface what I'm saying with that piece. Some of the new things that you're going to see in the European programs that we are offering, actually today is one of our deadline days, are that we have a range of horizontal priorities across the program for the first time, which I think are going to be very connectable to the sector that are here listening today. The first is that we will have a horizontal priority around inclusion and diversity, and I know other panelists have talked about the same priority emerging as a very highlight almost of the pan-European approach to the MFF. So inclusion and diversity for us means that what we're trying to do is reach out to engage new organizations. So organizations who've never felt these programs were for them before, there is space in the programs for those types of organizations and individuals, and especially for participants in organizations who are dealing with the social challenges or various different barriers to participation.
Can I interrupt there just
Sure.
a second, Lorraine? Could you give us, especially because that's great news. I mean, you're talking about organisations that may have not felt included or accessing this sort of money. What ones are you talking about? Particularly when you're referring to inclusion and diversity, are you talking about sort of migrants, refugees, LGBT community, mental health, I'm sure, is probably one of those issues, given obviously the past 14 months where we've had a dire effect on mental health. Just talk us through some of the areas that you're discussing.
Yeah, well, I think over the last, our experience of 30 years of management programs, we've always tried to work with an inclusion focus in mind. And that does mean that we're working with maybe DESH schools, or we're working with youth organizations in inner city or rural, or all of the different things that you're saying in terms of LGBT or mental health or all the different challenges and issues that people encounter every day. And I suppose I could name all of those, and they will be present in the program, and we would have had a very good track record of working with and engaging them, but it's not enough, I think, and that's a really heartening thing to see, coming from a European program, that we want more of it. We want to be able to make a wider space for everybody in the program. So we're looking for anybody who's experiencing difficulties or fewer opportunities, whether it's single parents and youth who are working with youth organizations, if it's people who are recovering from drug or substance misuse and who are involved in adult education or returning to education. There is a very broad church there of disadvantage out there in the community, and the program for the first time as a horizontal priority is naming that as something that it wants to achieve more and better with through the national agencies and the projects that they're funding. So for me and for our organization, it's building on what we've done before, but we're really excited about the potential to reach out in events like this to people who might not necessarily see themselves in those projects. They don't necessarily have to be they don't have to lead a project. Through us, we can help them to connect with organizations where they can be a partner, and they can add and they can contribute to a project.
So if you are a group who wants to deal with youth unemployment, youth mental health, or in particular support domestic violence, how would they go about accessing the money from, I suppose, their idea to getting the funding?
I think that's crucial. I think the idea is key. I think you need to know what kind of a change you want to make, either in your organization, in your community, or with the young people or the learners that you're working with. And in knowing that, the next step is to think about, well, who are the people that are doing this in a way that I'm interested in learning or interested in sharing about. And by engaging with us and as a national agency, one of the first things I would say is that if you look at any of our social media today or look at our website today, you'll be able to find a webinar, a coffee morning. You'll be able to find a workshop or some sort of an activity that will help you to start to locate your idea in the program, so that you'll then know, well, how do I apply and how do I actually build a program and a project and everything else that comes from that. And that's really what I mean about, and others have mentioned as well, that's what I mean about us being in the privileged position to be a very supportive organization in helping organizations and people to engage with the programs.
Okay, that's great. I mean, more on that in particular, because it's so interesting. And Brendan, let's talk to you about the EU programs for Northern and Western Regional Assembly. As you said, they're entering a new funding period. This is the prime time for people to get access money. what are the particular areas that you'd be focusing or are looking for proposals for?
Yeah, thanks, Shauna. I suppose where I work in the Regional Assembly, we are the contact point for Atlantic Area, which is a program open to the entire country of Ireland. It's not just for the Northern Western region. And again, Northern Periphery and Arctic covers all the West Coast along the, and then again along the border. So Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan in the next program period. In the previous program period, the 2014-2020 program period, the ERDF funding had 11 key priorities. Now they've been refined down to 5 key priorities for the next programming period, looking at a smarter Europe, a greener Europe, a more connected Europe, a more social Europe, and a Europe closer to its citizens. As I said previously, that we're now designing and developing these programs. And I suppose there's one element or one elephant in the room that we can't all ignore is Brexit. And a lot of these programs, certainly the programs I work on, have lost the UK geographically out of the program, but also the financial input from the UK into these programs. So the programs financially are reduced because of Brexit, which means that for them to be impactful, they must be more focused. So looking at the 2 programs that I want to mention today, the MPA and the Atlantic Area program, they're really, and again, this is coming from from the Commission as well, the orientation paper that would have come from the Commission at the beginning of the negotiations. The greener Europe is by far, from what I can read, the most important element of any of the ETC programs being developed, with the smarter Europe coming in a close second. Now the Atlantic Area program will also focus on the more social Europe, in particular using tourism to generate economic development. But if you're asking me the areas of focus, it will be the greener Europe and the smarter Europe, and looking at the European New Green Deal and looking at greener projects for projects and partners to focus on.
Just before I ask you about just a few examples, I mean, in relation to the Brexit impact, just to be clear, I mean, does it mean that because the UK is no longer there, the collaboration prospects are gone? And then in terms of Northern Ireland, there is funding for peace funding, but that's all that Northern Ireland accesses, isn't that right?
Yeah, so one of the first elements that agreed on Brexit, or seems to be the only one that has been stuck to at the minute, is the Peace Plus program. It's a which people would have known as the cross-border program, and it's a €1 billion fund, and that's managed by the SEUPB out of Belfast, the special EU programming body, and that looking at peace projects. The programs I run will have lost, say, all of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and Atlantic Area would have lost parts of Wales out of the program. So look, it's a huge challenge for the programs, but it's a huge opportunity for Irish project partners as well. All of a sudden, we're the only English-speaking region in these programs, and also, projects are scored on, the alignment of the project to the program, the geographical mix of the partnership, and from today's audience, I hate using technical terms, but the quadrihelix mix of industry, government, state agencies, the educational sector, and civil society, and that's becoming more important in the preparation documents for each of the programs. The civil society will be better represented in the next program than the past. So all of a sudden, being an Irish partner, you become extremely valuable because you're English speaking, and from a geographical purpose, you're on the periphery of all the programs. And also then, again, talking to the audience today, being part of a civil society organization, again, you're very attracted to become part of a project, because a project will score higher on the assessment if you have civil society as part of your project partnership.
And Brendan, so, in relation to the recovery fund, does that make up for any of the shortfall from the UK, Scotland, Wales, and so on? Like, how does that recovery fund impact the funding that you have, and has there been any changes or increases from the budget?
I suppose the recovery fund, the recovery and resilience fund, and there's the Brexit adjustment fund, and they're all under current negotiation. So they're a separate pot of funding than the ETC funding or the Interreg funding. So the funding that we're looking at, and again, Ireland and other countries, have really, showed their support and their belief in the European project, because where we have lost funding from the UK financial input, Ireland has increased its funding in both the MPA and the Atlantic Area Programme. So where we were extremely concerned about the size of the budget drop from one programme period to the next, it hasn't been as drastic as we expected, because we've seen the benefits of projects that have been delivered in previous programming periods and the benefits that they have provided to project partners, but also to the citizens of our regions. So the member states have come in behind the programs and invested more of their money to make up the gap that we're missing now from the UK involvement.
And when you talk about civil society groups and projects working, let's say, within the priorities of the Green Deal, give us an example of what you could be talking about.
Yeah, so I suppose, look, I mentioned the Smarter Europe and the Greener Europe, and they're going to be the next programming period. So those programs aren't going to be open for funding, and that's why it's good today to meet and discuss. They're going to be open for funding at the beginning of next year. But looking at, say, the current program period, the 2014 to 2020 program, there's a number of examples, and civil society is underrepresented in the project partnership, and it is a challenge to get civil society organizations to buy in. I think there's a fear of getting involved in European funding because people presume it to be very bureaucratic, and fear of over audit and paper trail, and very burdensome. But a number of organizations, Irish organizations, have got involved in even, say, renewable energy projects, where a community group who have a wind farm, where the wind farm is turning over all winter. It's now storing the excess energy into hydrogen for the tourism season when they don't have the wind turning. Or, you have age action groups getting involved in, one of the key themes of the MPA program is peripherality. So as people get older in peripheral regions, it makes it more difficult for them to stay in their homes and in their communities. So an Age Action Group has got involved in a project where it's using technology to keep people in their homes. So it might be an alarm that somebody doesn't move in their bed for a certain number of periods, or it might be monitoring of them without needing a nurse or somebody to call to the door. So there's loads, the use of technology to keep people in their homes and elderly in their homes. There's also social enterprise, which is hugely important. And, there's been a number of, say, tourism-based projects or social farm-based projects, again, funded through Interreg programs in the current program. And these opportunities are going to increase, in my opinion, in the next program.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Garrett Murray. Garrett, we hear consistently here in Brussels, Horizon Europe is going to be, really is the future of investment, the digital future, you name it. Tell us how Horizon Europe can help people here today.
So I think a bit like what Brendan was saying, there's kind of four underlying themes with everything European at the moment. So it's green, it's equal economic development, it's health, and it's digitalization, and everything else kind of falls off those four themes. And what Horizon Europe is doing a bit differently to what we've done before in other European research programs is it's very mission orientated. So they're trying to set targets and involve everybody they possibly can in achieving those targets. So without going over an old example that we've all heard 100 times, but it's a good one, which is the mission to put somebody on the moon. Okay, so everybody working in NASA who was involved in that had a part to play. And that's what the European research programs are focused on now. And it's based on Professor Mazzucato in the London School of Economics, this economic theory of all-inclusive economic development and innovation done in a mission-orientated way. So the big missions, as I was mentioning earlier, are climate change, cancer, climate neutral cities, healthy oceans, and soil health. And within those areas, there will be a plethora of different actions. Many of them are going to be research and innovation orientated, and many of them are going to be, let's call it more community orientated, citizen engagement orientated. So it's kind of big I, small o is how I describe it. So there's room for everybody. Now, each of those missions currently has a mission board, and that board is trying to define exactly what those engagements are going to look like. But what we do know is there's a massive focus on engaging civil society within those missions this time out. Now, if I take it down a level, then there are three pillars within the program. The first is effectively research excellence, which I won't talk about here today because it's a mono beneficiary supports for academic researchers. The second one is the clusters. And the clusters are things like civil society, health, climate change, digitalization. And within those and the related programs, there is a significant amount of areas which are going to involve the civil and voluntary sector. And, if I take the health area, there are already calls that have been identified in the first work programs around mental health, palliative care, patients. Within civil society, there's already calls in relation to domestic violence, etc. And even when we go beyond that in related areas such as the Innovation Health Partnership, which will roll out from next year, they've already mapped out all the patient organizations in Europe, because what they're trying to do is make sure the patient and their advocates are central to the process of any new developments. And if you think about the cancer mission, what it's trying to do is reduce by 3 million the number of people who die of cancer over the period of the program. Now, that's quite a target. You're only going to do that if everybody's involved. So what I'd say, Sean, is, and what's really important to the community out there today, there are research work programs which will be published towards the end of June formally. You can find them on the net anyway, because it's Brussels, everything is leaked. And you can also look at our horizoneurope.ie website and you'll see our review of drafts. But what you need to do is engage with the relevant national contact point, who is again on horizoneurope.ie, find out what's there at the moment, but more importantly, articulate to them that you want to involve yourself in the European research and innovation programs. Because sometimes people forget what NCPs, national contact points, do. Their job is to articulate the programs and support people to apply, but it's also to develop the programs in Brussels. And the more we know about what you want to be involved in from a research perspective, the more we can get that in the program. And we do this for industry already. We've done it for your sector in the past. It can easily be done again, but we can do that with the open relationship. So please do engage with your NC and we can advise you what's there at the moment and find out from you what you'd like to have there in the future.
Because when you think of Horizon, right now you think of obviously vaccines, AI, as you mentioned there, the digitalization of Europe, which is obviously another big priority in addition to the Green Deal. So, but you mentioned there, I suppose Horizon and civil society groups and domestic violence, which I would have said is like just so far removed. So where do you make that link?
Because for research and innovation, it's much wider. So these used to be called research programs. They're now innovation and research programs. And the objective is to use research and innovation to better European society. And that takes a much more all-encompassing view than before. So, the research on domestic violence was quite significant before. And even just to give you a flavor, I was looking through the website, or our portal, which was down for half of it. But in terms of, who's been involved in the last program, Goethe are in there, Concern are in there, Trocra are in there, the Spiritans are in there, O'Coulon Housing is in there, Bern Bio is in there, Tipperary Energy Agency is in there. So we've already seen this community activate themselves into this. What I just want to see is more of. It really comes down to knowing what the community want and where we can slot them in, but also developing priorities with other member states where they have similar interests and trying to develop those research calls. But research isn't just about, European research programs aren't just about digitalization and the economy. They're about European society, and that gets lost a lot in the conversation. Yeah. And that's why at the beginning, when I'm saying I'm from Enterprise Ireland, my mandate for this role actually devolves from Luke's department rather than from the Department of Business. So it is the research department. It's not just about the economy. Don't get me wrong, the economy is very important, but it's only one of the pillars we're trying to fix within the European research community.
And then just on Brexit, well, I suppose not just Brexit, but are the opportunities for collaboration?
Absolutely. So
there are, but you have to be an EU member state, just to be clear. Yeah.
Well, so when I mentioned earlier the mono-beneficiary support, so that's pillar one. Then pillar two, the clusters I've talked about, they're all collaborative research, okay? And they can involve consortia of 3 to 25 to 50 different actors. And they have to be from a minimum of 3 countries in the case of most calls. In relation to our new trading relationship with the UK, because I'm refusing to use that B word anymore, I've had enough of it. You don't have to just be an EU member state. You can be what's called an associated or third country. And at the moment, the negotiations are taking place for the accession of those countries to the programme. Nothing is done till the deal is finally signed, but it looks as though our neighbours will be joining in most of the programme. And then you'd have other countries for different areas, such as Switzerland, Norway, and Israel, who contribute to the budget. But separate to that, you can also have other countries who might come in on a research call, but they wouldn't be funded by Europe, they'd be funding it themselves. So a really good example of that was in the Green Deal call, which happened in October. There were several topics around energy and the sustainable goals with Africa. So you saw Irish innovators and researchers applying for funding with their counterparts in Africa and other areas. So it's not only those within the community. What we try and do where appropriate is also collaborate and co-invest in research with other economies.
Okay, thanks a million for that, Gareth. Really interesting. And Luke, from the ESF Managing Authority and Department of Education, how can the people watching us today, how can you help them and their program ideas?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose what is probably useful to think about first is just how the priorities of your own organization would align with the sort of priorities we're looking at for ESF in the next round. We have gone through a process now over the past year in developing our program with public consultation, with a needs analysis we carried out, and we've, I suppose, identified 5 key priorities from that. So the first one would be around access to employment, which I think is, I suppose, obvious enough when we think of the impact that COVID has had on the labour market over the past year. So this would be sort of around actions that would particularly focus on groups who've been worst affected by that. So younger, lower paid workers, but also on those groups who were maybe underrepresented in the labour market prior to COVID as well. So people with a disability, for example. The second priority we would have is around female labour market participation. So does remain below the EU average in Ireland, and I suppose linked to that is very much the issue of childcare affordability and supply. So that's certainly something we're looking to address. The third priority we have is skills and lifelong learning, which is, I suppose, the kind of core part of any ESF program, but I suppose it's particularly important now in the current context as a way of responding to all the disruption of the past year and the pandemic, and I suppose ensuring people to have the new types of skills that they'll need in the workforce, particularly around digital skills, will be one area. But I suppose the last 2 priorities I'll touch on here are maybe the ones I would see as the biggest areas of opportunity for civil society organizations. So one would be social inclusion, and this will be a big focus in our next program. Partially because it's a regulatory requirement. We have to spend 25% on social inclusion, but also there is just clearly a need there, particularly in light of COVID and the impact that has had on more marginalized groups. So that would be kind of training or outreach programs, courses that would particularly target migrants or traveler groups, for example, and a lot of them would be implemented through civil society. One new aspect to ESF I should mention as well here is the incorporation of the Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived into ESF Plus. So that's where the plus is coming from. So this is an existing fund. Some people may be familiar with it, some might not, but it basically provides food, basic material assistance to people who need it most. And it'll be part of ESF Plus in the next round, and civil society, in terms of how it's currently set up in Ireland, civil society would have a really crucial role to play in delivering that program. Then the 5th and final area that I'll mention is social innovation. So this is a new area for ESF in Ireland. It's something which the Commission has been very much encouraging, and it's something that we are very keen as well to include as a separate priority within our program. But it's basically, it's an opportunity to try new, different approaches to all the types of challenges I've mentioned already. So whether that's different ways of getting people with a disability into the labour market, whether it's helping people around digital skills, it's new approaches to these challenges, and it'll be something that will be particularly prioritised in our next programme and would be, I suppose, ideal for civil society organisations.
Well, I mean, all of those priorities are music to the ears to everybody watching today. You know, anyone who thinks that they're going to access money, social inclusion, women back to work, skill, lifelong learning and skills. I mean, they're amazing. So how do all of these priorities get met with the right people who are, you know, who already know all the challenges, who have all the ideas? You know, how do you work with the two? Because all of the issues that you mentioned there seem to be so outstanding and really almost neglected in Irish society. So how do you meet the, how do you ensure that the right people get the access to this funding?
Yeah, I suppose that's part of the challenge. That's part of the process we're going through now in putting together a program. But I suppose it's important to understand how the funding for ESF works overall. Like our program was set out at quite a high level, the broad priorities that we'll focus on. So more or less what I've mentioned there. Obviously, that's still needs to be finalized with the Commission. It's still under negotiation, but they're the areas we're looking at. And so it'll set out those priorities, the types of actions that we'll fund, and then I suppose there would be a range of different schemes or activities which would be run by government departments, which we would allocate the funding to. And some of those would be larger national type programs, but others are very much delivered by civil society and community organizations on the ground. So they'd be run, for example, on a calls for proposals basis. So that's how that link, I suppose, would come between our funding and civil society. So like, for example, in the 2014 to 20 round, we had calls for proposals on gender equality projects, which would have been run by what was then the Department of Justice. They would have had strands in terms of women's entrepreneurship and women's participation in the labour market. And I think their last call would have been in 2019 there, and that would have funded about 17 different projects around the country for a total of
What kind of projects, Luke, would they be? Like, I mean, because obviously you mentioned there, like, you know, women returning to the labour market. We know that the key challenge is obviously childcare. Is it about funding a local community creche, for example? Or what are the areas that actually, you know, work and that you're open to funding?
Sure, like I suppose those specific gender equality projects, I don't think they touched on childcare specifically. They would have been more focused on, I suppose, training courses for participants, like things that would build confidence and build interview and CV skills for people who are, I suppose, maybe have the ability and all the competence to be in the workforce, but have maybe just been outside for a while. So it's kind of taking those first steps to get closer, to get back into the workforce. We would also had a call for proposals for integration and employment of migrants. So again, they would have been projects, I suppose, which would have focused maybe on English language training, for instance, or the cultural aspects of finding a job in a new country.
So do you meet with civil society groups that train, you know, immigrants to the country in English, and also, you know, talk them through about cultural aspects? Is that where the funding would go to, groups that help directly in that way?
Yeah, so we would fund a department or an agency would come to us with an idea for a calls for proposals. We would fund that calls for proposals, and civil society organizations would apply to that. I suppose is this way of how it would work. It wouldn't necessarily always be a call like that. Like another example would be SICAP, the Social Inclusion Community Activation Program, which I'm sure some people listening in are very familiar with, run by Pobble. And they would provide different types of employment and training supports for marginalized groups. But I suppose that's very much focused on making that link to those most marginalized groups through local community development companies who would really know what's going on the ground. So yeah, I suppose there's always there's a layer of different organizations involved, but in terms of who is actually delivering it on the ground, a lot of the time, particularly in social inclusion projects, we would rely very heavily on civil society.
Sorry, I think there's something running outside our office here. If you hear that background noise, I don't know what it is. So what I was going to ask you, we've got a few questions in from people. Please just give us your names and the organization you're working from, if you don't mind, it helps. One question coming in from Emily Nelson for Garrett, and I think I know the answer to this one. It's how can civil society organizations connect with researchers and scientists? Is that something that Enterprise Ireland can facilitate? Garrett.
Yeah, so the NCP network, so 3/4 of them sit within my department in Enterprise Ireland. Some others are spread around. It's all on the website. Absolutely, we find out the topic you're interested in. We'll see who else is interested. And your point about thinking with academics is actually something we talked a little bit about earlier. I think one of the first things to engage when planning your research strategy is who are those academics that you have worked with before, or those researchers you are friendly with. What are they looking to do as well? So you can have some level of collaboration. And one of the reasons I stress that is in Enterprise Ireland, we can support companies and researchers to actually apply for funding. So we can give grants. I can't give grants for civil society groupings, but I can to academics. So actually hooking up with an academic as part of a research proposal is something we'd highly recommend, because it could also mean you can get the academic to be the work package lead or the coordinator. So going back to Brendan's point about, if it's the first time you're dipping your toe into this area, once you get used to the system, it's not as bureaucratic as it seems. But if it is your first time, doing it with somebody who's experienced is a really good idea. And those researchers and academics will have international networks as well. I think the other point there, Shona, that's really important is engage in the Brussels events, go to them, okay? So there's Research and Innovation Days on the 23rd and 24th of June. I'll put it out on the Twitter if the wheel wouldn't mind retweeting it. And I mean, there'll be discussions on every single cluster, every single topic. And obviously it's virtual this year, sorry, I should have stressed. So instead of 4,000 of us being squashed into a warehouse in Brussels, we're all doing it online. But no, so do engage with us. We'll try and partner you up, but also engage with your academic community. And, with many calls for research, there are always, or usually if there isn't, we will facilitate the brokerage events where you can meet other people. So if I just use one example, I mentioned our Green Call event last October. Enterprise Ireland with our Northern Ireland colleagues hosted an event. We had 3,000 participants, but we had 1,800 what we call marketplace proposals, which were researchers and community groups and companies saying, this is the topic we're interested in, and this is the role we want to play. That's kind of the modus operandi across Europe. And once you get into that, you get quite used to it, and we'll be more than happy to support you to do that.
Thanks, Garrett. Another question in from an anonymous attendee, which I think is a really good one. Where would projects focusing on supporting people living with chronic illnesses best fit in the various funding schemes? I think that's a great question. I don't know who to address it to. So whoever feels that they may respond better, then just jump in. Chronic illnesses project.
So there's two areas. There's the health cluster under Pillar 2 of Horizon Europe. There will be stuff around the cancer cluster, the cancer mission as it evolves. And then the European Innovation, or the Innovative Health Europe, which is looking at that patient mapping I was talking about earlier. There will definitely be something in there. So it is very worthwhile you engaging with my colleague Martha Cahill. And again, her details are on our website, horizoneurope.ie, and she'll be able to map out for you where you might be able to play a role there.
And this is for Luke. Will the collection of data for ESF be easier to collect? We're currently submitting data from 2015. I think that's for Luke. Anyway, it talks about ESF. So,
yeah, sure. Look, I suppose something that you do need to acknowledge with a lot of EU funding is that it isn't always simple, and I don't think we'd make any attempt to hide that. ESF does have a lot of data reporting that goes with it. All I can say is that I think it's important to have that in terms of evaluation, in terms of how you design programs, but we will always try and make it as simple and as straightforward as possible for the different organizations involved in it. I suppose particularly in the last round, there was a jump in terms of the data requirements. And that was something that we all had to struggle a little bit to get to terms with. But I think going forward, it will certainly be managed in a better, sort of more streamlined process with better IT systems, and just made a little bit easier for everyone. So look, I appreciate there are challenges in terms of ESF, but there's definitely a lot of opportunities as well.
And just another question coming in from someone as well, which I think, was touched on by Brendan earlier. The requirement for European, well, this is for Lergas, but it's generally around bureaucracy. The requirement for European partnership can be quite challenging for organizations new to Erasmus+, but I think sometimes requirements can be challenging per se. What kinds of support can Lergas provide, or what would ideally be in place in Ireland to facilitate this? That was obviously for you, Lorraine, though.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that's always a good starting point question for anybody who's interested in European cooperation, because they're collaboration projects and all collaborations are difficult. So finding the right partner is always going to be a hugely important indicator of the success of your project and the success of your experience. So what we do already to try and support people to find partners is we actually host a range of different meetings, and events, contact making, partner finding. They can be targeting teachers, they can target youth workers, they can be targeting volunteering organizations. And what we do is we try and create a space for people to think about maybe perhaps the priority of inclusion or green or smarter Europe with their peers, and they can start to figure out how they might be able to join up or have further conversations to see if there's a potential partnership there. So we would host quite a lot of those, even in the last 14 months online. We're doing a lot of that kind of work, because I think any project that you're going to take on board, whether it's a short exchange project where you're moving young people for 2 weeks, or whether it's a 3-year strategic project that's looking at systems change and educational systems, you're going to need to trust your partner. You're going to need to have a real strong understanding of how each other works, and what your values are, and what your experiences are and your talents are in terms of contributing to that kind of project. So it's a very important reflection to have at the outset, and it certainly is something that I think makes or breaks the experience for a lot of organizations who do go down this pathway. So we invest quite a lot of energy to try and support people to ask the right questions and the space to do those kinds of meetings and events.
Okay, and a question. Sorry, go on. Somebody jump in there.
If it's okay, I just noticed a question there, and I just want to be, in case I did offend, in terms of the B word, as I said. The reason I'm trying to move away from that is the actual B word is the act of leaving. And what I'm trying to make the point there is the UK have left. And what we've been doing on a research innovation perspective is trying to deal with the new reality of that. And unfortunately, a lot of conversation ends up being about, oh, that shouldn't have happened, this shouldn't have happened, So we all know the impact. We're dealing with it every day in Enterprise Ireland with our companies, but it's just to start thinking about our new relationship and how we work together, rather than harping back to the way it used to be. So to Patricia Lee's question there, will there be prioritization around Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe funding for the North or border counties? No, there won't. But what there is significant cooperation between the NCP networks, North and South. So what we do, and I've always done, by the way, is we go to each other's meetings on an ongoing basis. And then there's an overall all-island steering group which tries to bring people together. And we do that with Intertrade Ireland. So we had a very significant uptick in the number of ROI and NI joint consortia applying for the Green Deal, and results are starting to come out there. And that's something we'll very much be building on, because obviously North-South cooperation in terms of RNI is really important. So just to be clear what I mean with the B word there, it's to start working forward rather than looking back. We totally understand the impacts, we deal with it daily.
Okay, this is a question for Brendan. Interreg applications can be extremely onerous and difficult for many civil society organisations to take on capacity-wise. What is being done, if anything, to streamline that process?
To streamline it, so there's a number of programs are looking at what's known as GEMS. GEMS is the new Interact online system for both application assessment, and then project management. So it would mean that application forms across different programs would be very similar. There's no more than Luke acknowledging difficulties with project partners getting involved in our European funding. It is an onerous task to get funding, but it's an onerous task because the funding is extremely valuable, and we want to ensure that the right projects get supported. And to make that assessment accurately, the assessment boards require the level of detail that's being asked. Now, I've no doubt, and I've seen application process, whether it be a one-step or two-step application process, that there are certainly areas that programs can improve on, whether it be the level of detail in relation to budgets broken down between work packages or yearly management. So there are areas. So simplification is a word that has been mentioned in the last programming period, and sometimes when Europe simplifies a process, I think it actually has made it more cumbersome in the process. But I think that some of the new processes, some of the new simplification models for projects that are successful will help deliver projects and be less bureaucratic, less burdensome, requiring less audit trail in the delivery of the program. So yeah, and again, just in relation to civil society and getting involved in projects, if you've been involved before, that's fine. But if you're new to this, talk to your national contact points, give them your idea where you work, what area you'd like to focus on. And it's our role. We're being paid to align you with Irish partners that are working in the same space that might be applying for funding, or we get projects coming across our desk that are looking for Irish partners that are well developed already, and you're coming in to assist in the finalization of that application rather than starting from scratch. So the early engagement with your national contact points is and continuous engagement throughout the application writing phase is key to success in this process.
So really contact points, that can make sure you're not going in the wrong direction. And then you're a load of time.
There's a number of key elements to any application. The first, I always think, is the alignment. So aligning, your goal and your strategy with the funding program's goal and strategy, that you're not trying to shoehorn your application into a funding model. You have to make sure that what you're trying to fund is what is funded by the program, and not wasting your time writing an extremely burdensome application and then not being successful. The second thing is your partnership, and this is key to today's audience, that civil society is key to a good partnership mix, and a geographical mix then coming from Interreg programs, and then early engagement. Engage with your contact point. And finally, I'd say, is don't give up. Don't expect to be successful on your first application. It's a continuous learning process. And when you are successful, you build new networks, you meet new people, and it opens new doors for new ventures. Typically, you'll see people that have been successful in one European project continue and keep going on in European projects, because then their network opens up, their opportunities open up. You go to events in Brussels. The busiest week of the year in Brussels is typically in October for European Regions and Cities Week. You get to go to this event, you meet new people, you hear what's coming down the track, and you see where the funding is coming from.
And where do you get access to your most relevant contact points?
I suppose events like today. It's great that the Wheel have organised events like today for civil society to meet the likes of myself and Gareth and Lorraine and Luke, and I suppose for civil society, I'm going to throw this back to Emma. Emma would be the contact for civil society for her then to guide them in the right direction to, if it's an Interreg project, to the likes of myself, or Horizon to Gareth and so on. So, the Wheel would be the first point of contact, I'd say, for civil society. And
we'll speak to Emma. We'll give us, at the end, she'll sort of round up and give us a lot of all of that information as well. Here's a very kind of fundamental question from Bianca Peel. What about holistic integrated creative arts projects? Holistic integrated creative arts projects for supporting mental health and well-being. Where might one get started in seeking support? Really basic stuff. So, but very important, and to me, it's very fundamental. The main question, I suppose, for the whole point of having this discussion. Who wants to jump in there and maybe answer that one?
I would like to answer that one, and probably it might respond to some of the other questions of just different groups of organizations and people working with different groups or advocating for different sets of needs or asking questions like, is this for them? I think my answer would be, these programs are for everybody. It's not about who you are. And it's not about the groups that you're working with or what you're doing. It's about being able to reflect a little bit about what is it you're doing that could be of interest to European partners in terms of, your own practice of what you're doing in creative arts, or what you're doing in terms of working with people in terms of well-being or whatever it is. What are you doing that you feel needs to be shared, discussed, expanded, maybe systemized in some way. And it's about really identifying those elements of your practice that's important to share, important to discuss, important to network around. And then it's about how we can help you. Each of us here can help you and guide you to see which of the programs is the best avenue for you to be able to deliver your idea into a project reality that can affect change in your organization, change in your community, or change in the different educational systems that you're part of. So it's not a direct answer to the person who's working in that space, but I think it's a message, I think, for me, to anybody who's listening today who's wondering, is it still for me? It's for everybody. It's really just about trying to connect with what you're doing that has a value to be shared and has an interest potentially to be built on with European partners.
And Lorraine, then for that person on her particular issue, would getting in touch with someone like you help? Like, she has the idea, she probably has she knows there's a market for it. We all know there's a market for it. So getting in touch with you, would that be the first starting point?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the same would apply to any of the colleagues here on the panel. If it's not my program or our program that's going to be able to support you, we'll be able to give you a steer as to which of the colleagues might be able to give you that guidance. There's usually a way to do it. And I think Brendan made a really good point about not being hung up on the program, infrastructure and shoehorning your project or your thinking or your practice into getting the funding. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer on the idea development phase to really figure out, well, actually, which is the best, most authentic route for me to go in terms of achieving what I want and what this program wants.
This is a question for Brendan. I'm going to ask Luke as well. Can Brendan mention project partnerships that have been successful in accessing funding in the past? Brendan?
Yeah, I suppose Ireland, and I suppose I talk about where Irish partners have been successful. And again, I mentioned a community wind farm that accessed funding on looking at disruptive technologies and hydrogen and creation of that. There's also been a number of creative industry projects led by the Western Development Commission being the Irish partner, but having a number of civil society and social enterprises as project partners, feeding into the Western Development Commission, looking at the digitization of the creative industries. There've been a number of project partners coming from the tourism sector, again using digitization to help drive business in the tourism sector.
So give an example of one specific partnership that was successfully produced?
So I go back to the creative industry sector. There was it was a project called Creative Edge. It was a follow-on project from a project called Creative Momentum. And what it did was it looked at the creative sector and some of the deficiencies or challenges the sector had in sparsely populated rural areas. So the west of Ireland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, much more sparsely populated than we think we are. And the challenges to be involved in the creative sector are coming from a small rural area. And it looked at it, so it created a platform for them to sell their wares. So they all didn't create their own website. The program funded the creation of a particular creative industry website for them to sell their wares, and it helped them create and regenerate business for those businesses involved.
Thanks, Brendan. And same thing to you, Luke, in terms of ESF. What project partnerships, like specific examples of civil society groups working to get funding successfully?
I'm not specifically aware of examples of groups coming together. I suppose maybe the partnership part may not be as much of an aspect of ESF as others, but certainly like we would have a lot of the activities being delivered would have different inputs from social partners, from civil society groups. Like, I suppose one specific example that I didn't mention earlier, but would be very relevant to civil society, would be the Ability Programme, which is basically about helping to bring young people with a disability closer to the labour market. And that funded about 27 different projects. It's still ongoing, and it'll be reviewed, and we'd be quite hopeful about it being included in our next programme. But That's kind of road testing like 27 different approaches to that challenge in different locations around the country. And it's very collaborative in nature, I suppose, in terms of working together with different educators, different service providers, and different communities to increase the capacity of people with a disability to go to work.
Shauna, just before you move on from there, just people have mentioned mental health, and again, Interreg wouldn't be the typical place you would go for mental health funding. However, there's one project, and again, where civil society was involved in it, it's called Chatbot. So it was where people would ring for assistance if they weren't feeling well, but sometimes the organizations hadn't full-time staff, so it was an AI technology used and developed to guide and direct people that might be in need of assistance when a physical person wasn't there. So there's always opportunities and always avenues to steer your project.
Which is why we're here today, so people know that there are opportunities. That question earlier in relation to chronic illness that came from Colin White from the Irish Kidney Association, who says they're sitting on a very interesting research proposal looking at making the case for introducing organ donor awareness into the school's curriculum. We're struggling to find a funding stream that fits. Perfect example. Would that be you, Garrett Murray, Horizon? Is it you, Lorraine? Who would think that would fit in their project?
Definitely has the potential to fit into some of the areas in the health clusters, if not in this if not in this issue of calls, possibly in the next. So I would very much contact the Health NCP and Enterprise Ireland to make clear what it is very specifically you're looking at, and they'll be able to tell you where it is or where we might be able to get it in the future.
Oh, that's great. I suppose coming back to, maybe I'll start with you, Luke, again. What advice would you give to civil society organisations in accessing money to your programme? And what would be the first sort of top 3 things that you see all the time that there are sometimes mistakes, or not quite mistakes, but that people are going down the wrong route? What would you say in terms of advice right now, Luke?
Yeah, look, I suppose advice will always vary by the different type of call we're talking about under ESF. Different activities will have different specific requirements. But in terms of general advice I could give, like, I think there's a few key criteria that you'll always want to think about. Basically, when we're looking at a proposal, it'd be around an organization's actual capacity to deliver on that. Obviously, the links into the kind of EU and national strategy, so aligning it with sort of the aspects like Garrett mentioned or Brendan mentioned earlier around green and digital and things like that. There's also a number of horizontal themes under ESF, so kind of around promoting equality and non-discrimination. So they're aspects that we would like to see in every project that we fund. And then as well, of course, there's always going to be value for money and things like that. But I suppose that would be the general advice. In terms of then where you go, I would mention, I think there's a website, www.eufunds.ie, which certainly has a lot of our information on it. I think it also has information around Erasmus and Horizon and ERDF and Interreg programs. So certainly, along with Access Europe, I think that's a very useful resource. There's a calls for proposals section under ESF, so we would be advertising any of our calls there. So that would be my, I suppose, general advice to people start.
That website, just call it again. That would be, let's say, with people who have ideas. What's their first step?
The first step, I suppose, is considering. I suppose thinking about what your idea is, and then trying to align it with the most relevant fund. You would be, I think, contact us is one way of doing that. Absolutely. I suppose for ESF, our program is still in development, so I can't tell you exactly what we will be funding yet, and I can't tell you details of calls that are coming up or anything like that just yet, but they will be coming up over the next year or so. And will be advertised on that website. But I suppose probably all I can say for now, just that we're still developing the program, and we would hope to have a mature version of that in place by the end of the summer, and then a final program in place by the end of the year. So I suppose they're dates to look out for as well.
Okay. This question coming in from Lorraine. For Lorraine, regarding volunteering, can you give an example of what a European Solidarity Corps project would look like?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I probably haven't spoken enough about that amazing program that we're involved with. But an example off the top of my head would be a project where we support in Cloughjordan, the community farm, for example, and they have a number of young people working there on sustainable development activities and organic farming activities, learning about all of those kinds of things. They could be there for anything between 6 and 12 months. And that project actually tells us that, you know, having those young people there really augments the community, because so many young people move away from rural areas after finishing school. So these are young Europeans who are living and working in Cloughjordan to support the community, learn for themselves about sustainable living, and engage in different community activities. So the European Solidarity Corps will provide, you know, I suppose an element of quality assurance for the project plan that's there between the partners who are sending and hosting young people as volunteers. And it also provides a lot of funding towards the costs of hosting and sending the young people as volunteers.
Okay, Lorraine, thanks a million for that. And Colin White from the Irish Kidney Association says, thanks very much for such a clear answer. Thanks for that, Garrett. Another question for everyone. Brexit, or the B word, is having a significant impact on the communities along the border necklace of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The impact is felt on a day-to-day basis. Will border counties be prioritised in Horizon 2020 and other funding channels, given that impact of Brexit? That's a good question. I don't know who wants to go. Maybe Brendan wants to start off with a response to that.
Yeah, I can leave the Horizon question to Garrett.
To Garrett, yeah.
So, you know, coming from the Northern Western Region Assembly, and, you know, having a border region, the Interreg programs won't be you know, any major focus on the border in Ireland. However, I've mentioned the Peace Plus program. This is a massive program. It's a €1 billion program, which will completely focus on the border communities and projects where there is cross-border development and engagement to assist in, you know, coming from the Troubles rather than Brexit. In relation to Brexit, then there are, you know, a number of funds probably outside today's scope, but you know, the Border Enterprise Fund in relation to enterprise development, and then there's also the Brexit Adjustment Fund that has been designed as well, and they again will be heavily focused on the border regions. So they're not in relation to today's discussion, but there are funds that are there to help border communities, whether it be through the Peace Plus program or Brexit related, you know, supports.
And saying that question to you, Garrett.
Yeah, Sean, I think I addressed the Horizon bit earlier.
Yeah.
I was afraid earlier we missed it. That's why I wanted to go back, because it isn't a really important point.
Yeah.
And I think, as Brendan mentioned, there's also, I mean, we had about 4 months ago, we made the awards on the regional border fund from an enterprise perspective. You know, we're monitoring that very clearly with the department to see what more we can do in that space. I think, I mean, to the wider point, as we reset the relationship and do things differently, there's a huge appetite among the various actors, be it east-west or be it north-south, to make even more of an effort to continue to collaborate. So, I mean, I think that's there. As recently as yesterday, I was speaking to Welsh and NI colleagues to see what we could do as a triangle in terms of collaboration and support. So I even when Brendan and I talk about the funds that are available now, we all know this is going to be something that's going to develop quite significantly over the near term and into the medium term, because there's a lot of resetting to be done.
Yeah, and just on that as well, Garrett, like, just, you know, Europe is very outward looking, I think, at the minute. And it's you know, even so the programs I look after, are looking at Russia, they're looking at Canada, they're looking at other opportunities that are to become available in other markets for the Irish partners to network, to get knowledge sharing and best practice back to the country, not just from the European Union, but there were restrictions previously in funding that it would be capped at 20% of a program outside the program area. The regulations have changed that now, that there's less of a restriction, and the EU is extremely outward looking.
That's good to hear. I think unless there's any more questions coming in there from participants, before I hand you over to Emma Murta from the Wheel, I think maybe in terms of advice that all the participants can give to people listening today, like top tier advice. I'll start off with you, Lorraine.
Sorry, I had my mic off there. I think it's just to reiterate what we've been trying to communicate through the panel conversation today, is just engage with the national contacts, ask your questions, delve into conversation with us, and if it's not going to be something that's for you, you'll find out very quickly. There will be no ambiguity on it. So for me and for Lurgus, I think, have a look at what we have available on our website in terms of events and activities. We do project idea labs, we do webinars on different themes and topics, but just engage with us and come and ask us some questions, and we'll try and help you to find an avenue for your ideas.
And the best way of getting in touch with you, Lorraine?
Lurgus.ie.
Lurgus.ie, that's grand. And then you or somebody from Lurgus can get in touch depending on the subject area of the programme or the proposal. Yeah,
I mean, anybody who wants to email me directly can, and I'll happily move you along through my colleagues who are way more expert at all of this than I am. But yeah, you can email me directly at lgilligan@lurgus.ie.
And again, you can, even at that point, that first point, you can probably say to someone, look, that'll be a runner, that won't be, or if you just alter it some way. I mean, people will know straight away. They're not going to waste, several weeks writing a big proposal to be refused.
No, we want to talk to you before you get to a proposal. Yeah. So definitely come to us with your ideas, and that's where we can really give you the best of our insights.
Okay, perfect. And same to you, Brendan, just advice to people listening now and accessing your funding, given, as you said earlier, that we're at the start of a new funding chapter.
Yeah, I suppose it's probably going back over what we said, but talk to Emma and talk to people in the Wheel. They will give you the steer and probably the best direction to go, whether it be Interact, Horizon, or so on. Engage with the contact points early and engage with them often. Engage with them with a one pager of your project idea, and keep engaging throughout the process of your application. As I said, for me, the two key things are alignment of your project and your application with the program. There's no point writing a really complicated application if it doesn't fit what the program is going to fund. So you got to make sure that your project is aligned to the program that you're applying for the funding, and then don't give up. Keep going. If it doesn't happen the first time, you learn and and when you do crack that nut, and you do get your funding and you do get involved in European projects, you'll see the benefit of not just the financial gain of having your projects financially funded, but the knowledge share, the partnerships, the networks that you create, and then further projects that will come down the line because of that.
And same to you, Garrett. What advice do you give? I mean, amid the pandemic, when economies are, in a bad way, there is money there. There is optimism, there is hope, there is innovation. So I suppose that's a key message.
It's the biggest research innovation program the union's ever had, and that's not a mistake. That's because of what's going on. We saw, if we look back to the original beginning of Horizon 2020, what the program looked like, and we looked like what it was at the end, it changed quite considerably. And, these programs do evolve. And that comes back to Brendan and Lorraine's point. And actually, we had our own launch of Horizon Europe there 6 weeks ago with Minister Harris and the Commissioner. And we had a panel at the end of it with 5 people who've been very successful. And they all said exactly the same thing: talk to your NCP early in the process, okay? Brendan's thing is really important. This European programs don't allow you to put a square peg into a round hole. They're designed not to allow that happen. So the more you align, the better. The more you engage with your NCP, the better. Remember, the NCP was most likely sitting around the table in Brussels in one of those dark rooms, deciding what the topic was going to look like. And they know what the actors and the invisible hand, as there's always an invisible hand with these things, that are coming and operating behind it. So regularly an NCP will say to you, do you know, I wouldn't be putting that too much effort into that call, because they know it's already stitched up. So it is about really making sure, but that you're applying and putting energy into what you actually have a chance of succeeding in, because success rates vary. This is a very competitive program, so you want to do it right. You also want to do it with the right people. Okay, so if you're doing it for the first time, you want to do it with experienced people. And don't go rushing into something because it doesn't fit. Wait till it fits, and make sure the NCP knows what you want to research and who you want to get involved with, so they can help you with that. It is a two-way process. You know, it's not about one-way information sharing. We have to learn from NCPs. And just to conclude, horizoneurope.ie, under each of the clusters, you click on them on the website and it'll give you the relevant NCP. And if there's any issues or nobody's not responding or you can't find us, you just email me directly at firstname.surname below there at enterpriseireland.com, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Okay.
Brilliant. That's great, Garrett. And Luke, you know, some of the priorities you listed at the start are incredibly heartening and probably fit a lot of the people who are watching today. So again, advice to people who want to access that funding. And I know you said that you haven't, it's not all clarified yet, but I suppose for the moment, what people should be looking out for in terms of programs that you're willing to fund.
Yeah. Look, I suppose I think the advice that others have supplied before me is very good advice, and listen to that. But my addition would be really just to consider how your own organization's priorities might align with some of the ESF priorities. Two big ones that I think are really worth focusing on are social innovation as a new area for ESF is something that we're hoping to get up and running. And I think there would be big opportunities for civil society organizations there in terms of social entrepreneurship, in terms of new ways of trying to do things. Social inclusion as well, as I mentioned, is a big focus. So we'll be developing the program over the next few months. We'll have a more mature draft available at the end of the summer, which will go out to public consultation again. So that's another opportunity for people who are here today to input into that and to try and shape the future program. And we'd hope to have that finalized by the end of the year. And look, I suppose beyond that, it's Access Europe, the EU funds website. And also, obviously, of course, you can get in touch directly with me or with any of my colleagues in the section. So the best email address for that is probably PEIL, P-E-I-L, at DFHERIS.gov.ie, if you can remember that. But it's all on the EU funds website as well.
Perfect. Thanks a million, Luke, Garrett, Lorraine, and Brendan. I'm going to hand you over to Emma Murta from the Wheel, who will also be able to take all of your questions again and be able to pass you on all the bits of information, email addresses, and so on, contact points from all the participants today. But for me here in Brussels, thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Shona, for giving us your time today. And I know that it's a busy news day in Brussels, so if you need to rush off, don't worry about that. Just thank you so much for your support. And hi, everyone. As Shona said, my name is Emma Murta. I'm the European Programs Manager at the Wheel. And just on behalf of the Wheel, I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists for participating and sharing their excellent insights today, and also to Shona for her expert moderation throughout. I think it was a really fantastic session, and it just demonstrated the breadth of opportunities available to Irish civil society organisations through these programmes, which are just a few, by the way, of the many Irish civil society organisations. So this isn't it, these 4 programmes, you know, there's many more, but unfortunately we didn't have time to highlight them all today. I also just want to take the opportunity to thank all of the participants for taking part. The level of engagement and all the questions and everything that came in just demonstrated, I think, that there's a real appetite for more involvement in European programmes in Irish civil society. And just if there are any questions that we didn't get to, because there are quite a few questions coming in the Q&A box there, do feel free to channel them directly to europe@wheel.ie, and we can signpost you to the relevant contact point, or we can address them if we can. So do always just feel free to get in touch with us. So before we finish up our session today, I did want to mention the supports that the Wheel provides, I should say, in relation to EU funding, specifically the Access Europe programme that's been mentioned a few times today. This was a programme that we launched last year, thanks to funding from the Department of Foreign Affairs. And I actually have a short video that I'm going to share, because it will probably explain it in a much more succinct way than I ever could. And yeah, I'll play it now here. A second now.
Access Europe helps Irish civil society unlock and manage EU funding. It's a support programme run by The Wheel, providing information, training, help desk support and network building opportunities. The European Union's new multiannual financial framework will run from 2021 to 2027 and contains a plethora of funding programmes for organisations like yours. These include education and training, youth, sport, citizenship, rights and equality, research and innovation, and the social economy. These programmes will serve the EU's overall objectives of being smarter, greener, more connected, more social, and closer to its citizens. Innovative projects undertaken by civil society will play a key role in driving these objectives, but navigating EU funding can be challenging. Join Access Europe today for expert help with accessing EU funding opportunities.
So just a short overview of our Access Europe project there. And I just, as the video mentioned, the role of Access Europe really is just to be a central hub for Irish civil society in relation to European programmes. So we work with the expert contact points like those that you heard from today to identify the opportunities and information that's specifically relevant to civil society, because there can be a lot of it out there. So to try and condense down what exactly is relevant to civil society and disseminate that directly to them. We can also help civil society organisations identify where their project idea belongs within the many EU programmes that are available. And that's something that kind of came up during the discussion today, and then signpost them to the relevant contact point or agency, while providing additional wraparound supports as well. So as Brendan mentioned, we're happy to be that first port of call for organisations, and we can advise on projects that could be quite transversal across a variety of programmes. So one of the questions that came in there today mentioned a project that was involved in mental health and the arts. So we could certainly help, speak to that person and help them figure out what exactly is the angle of their project. Is it more of a Creative Europe project? Is it more of a health project? Or is it actually more based in education when you break it down? So often people have really excellent ideas, and particularly if they're completely new to European funding, they're full of ideas, but they just don't know how to go about structuring it into a project and how to kind of find its home within the broad range of European projects that is available. So we're there to just try and demystify that process a little bit and provide that initial support to get people going on their journey. While also, if and when organizations are successful in achieving funding, providing ongoing support as well, so that they don't just secure the funding, but that they also have a positive experience and that they're supported through delivering their first projects or first few projects, so that they can confidently engage in European programs going forward. Importantly, we also represent civil society to EU stakeholders to ensure that the sector's needs are understood and that organisations are fully supported to participate in European programmes. And actually Access Europe is an example of that. This is something that we believed was necessary in order to have civil society fully engage in European programmes. So we pushed hard for it to be funded, and now we have that, and we're going to continue to keep pushing for more and more supports that will allow for civil society to participate as equal partners in European programmes. So just to note that Access Europe is free, and you can join via our website. It's accesseurope.ie. And by joining, you get access to all kinds of things. So there's information, including our monthly newsletter, which has general EU updates, but very importantly, I think it also has a summary of all the current EU funding deadlines, and that can be delivered directly to you, filtered down to what's of interest to civil society specifically. And it allows you to kind of quickly scan what's out there, what are the opportunities, and then access more information quite easily. So anybody who's ever had the joy of trying to navigate the many different European funding websites and portals and trying to make sense of all of these kind of things, it's definitely nice to have somebody summarize it in a condensed way for you. And we also provide free events and training across a variety of EU programs, project development, project management, in addition to our EU project managers network as well, which supports people on an ongoing basis throughout their projects. We provide help desk support from our EU team. So that's for myself and my colleagues, Christina and Emily. And we provide a lot of opportunities for network building, including a new online partnership platform, which is currently in development and will be available by the end of the year. So watch this space for that. So please do sign up if you haven't already, and keep up to date on the vast array of opportunities that are available through these programs that we heard about today, and the many others as well that we didn't get a chance to spotlight. We also just want to say a final thank you to our funder, the Department of Foreign Affairs, for making this program and indeed this event today possible. But that more or less ends today's session 5 minutes early, so that's great. Thanks again to all of our participants, our panelists, our moderator, and we will see you tomorrow for day 2 of the Wheels Summit.